Actually, this is an issue to do with our culture. Now, it may just be the time that we're framing it in. In the 80s, we framed it in adult Christian learning. We're framing it in a slightly different way. But actually, what we're thinking through is actually thinking through, okay, it's not just important to identify these things in a report. It's more important to do something about them, and to keep doing things about them, and to keep on doing things about them. And so what we're trying to do in Setting God's People Free is not to layer this as another initiative. When we're working with dioceses, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say to dioceses, how's this reflected in the things you're doing, resourcing and talking about? How is it part of your plan as a diocese? How is it part of your plan as a deanery? How are these things going to become part of the kind of priorities that we've got and part of the things that we're also asking? And then we're asking the question, what do we need to do differently? So we don't want to do more things. We want to ask questions, what do we need to do differently? So we don't know some of the things that we need to do differently. So we have to try some things and learn from those things. So we have to try to make changes to some of our services. We have to try to make changes to some of our training schemes. We need to try to make changes to the way in which we train clergy and other lay ministers. We need to try and find the resources that are going to enable people. And we need to try and learn and try and learn and try and learn. And that activity is actually just the activity of being church. That's what the church is called to do. Elaine Graham uses the phrase intentional Christian communities, where she talks about the idea that what it means to be church is we gather together to work out what it means to be Christian. Effectively, that is what we're doing in Setting God's People Free. We're trying to find out how do we help our churches and worshiping communities be intentional Christian communities where people gather together to work out what it means to be Christian. It's the calling that we've always had. What I wanted to try and do with that sense of the secular age is to say, I don't want us to beat ourselves up as a church that we didn't do this report, we didn't do this report, we didn't do this report. Because what we're tackling is a big societal shift in the place of faith and religion. And we're trying to work out what's going to be the most fruitful life together as a church to enable us as the people of God to meet those conditions and to change the things that we realise aren't helping. But we need to do some things that are pretty important in order to get this on the map. And the whole area of, from the laity point of view, is even today, when we talked about, and it's not meant to be a criticism, when we've talked about places, I noticed that we talked about deaneries that only have 6 incumbents. So our qualifying description of places was the number of clergy. So it's that's the kind of cult. Now, within that, you've also got all sorts of things going on in hearing actually what is going on the ground and stuff, but the starting point of description is, this is so-and-so deanery, it's got 6 clergy, it's got 13 churches and a benefice. Our descriptional starting points orientate around that aspect of institutional life. And I tell you what, it's going to sound, it's damaging a lot of clergy. As I say, I'm sensitised to this because my wife's a vicar. But I know most clergy I know really want to have churches that are thriving, full of people who love God and want to serve God, across the world. So we have to stop heaping a lot of pressure. That's we're all in a difficult system, but we're all in that together, to quote David Cameron. But culturally, that's our default location. I saw a theological college principal tweet at Petertide ordinations, #future of the church. Now, I know what they were getting at, because there were some good ordinands going through for ordination. They're wonderful leaders and wonderful people, but they're not the future. If we heap on that the future of the church, it's an incredible burden. It's also not true. So there are cultural things that we do, the ways we talk about ourselves. It's appropriate in this context to introduce ourselves as who we are from our deanery and from our diocese. But you've all got... some of you are retired, so you've got the fullest, busiest lives on the planet, judging by the people I know. I can't book my parents to come and look after our kids. They're always doing stuff. But how do we introduce ourselves? Am I so-and-so from St Margaret's or so-and-so from that? It's why I made a point of telling you about my love of musical theatre and Crystal Palace. It's just a little thing, but it's about me, So how do we get to know, these are the cultural things. It doesn't answer the whole question, but these are the cultural things. So it's an issue of culture change. Our theology is part of our culture, so we have to wrestle with that. We have to wrestle with what do we understand ordained ministry is and for. It's wonderful to see the area dean and the lay dean in leadership roles, but that's a real issue because we've also got narratives of clergy being the kind of key leaders, but also we've got lay people as now focal ministry leaders. There's huge amounts of stuff going on. Well, we're trying to work this out. My Episcopal champion, Bishop Rachel from Gloucester, who is on our advisory group, when she goes around diocese, around the parishes in her diocese, as soon as someone tries to introduce themselves as, I'm Mary from St Bart's, she will say, lovely to meet you, Mary. What do you do in the rest of your life? It's a practice, a habit. She will immediately close that down so she can get to talk about what happens in the rest of life. So I think we've recognised that we've got some deep cultural traits that we need to move from. And I want to talk about the kind of first one of those three things, because it talks about the finding God in everyday life, being ambassadors, and then being church together. And we're working through those things in terms of our thinking. And the first one, about finding God in everyday life, this is one of the things that we want to make sure that we begin with, because unless we engage with people that God is interested in our everyday lives, and that we can engage with God, use our gifts in everyday life, and sense and find God in everyday life, that's the foundation. That's the thing, and it's the thing that we're trying to do as the church. And some of you have seen this already, because I did this in the Reigate Archdeaconry. Is it? Does the Reigate Archdeaconry? They recently changed and moved around. So, it was Tandridge that moved and got merged. South Croydon, the posh bit of Croydon of Southwark Diocese. No offence. Finding God in everyday life, waking up, taking a stand, and acting on nudges. So Adrian, as part of the digital team, was here this morning. This is work that we've done with Adrian. And what we're trying to do is, within his year of campaigns, we're trying to do a series of campaigns for ordinary time. So how do we use and think about ordinary time in the church's year, just from our point of view as our digital campaigns? And I want to talk you through this and also link in with this resource that we've got, Setting God's People Free from Monday to Saturday, which I've scattered around on your tables. And then I'm going to ask you to think about how you might make use of these in your deaneries. So to try and get people to think about faith in everyday life, we wanted to be intentional about this and actually get people to kind of frame it. So we developed two prayers, a prayer to start the day and then an examine prayer to do at the end of the day. And working with Adrian's team, this was a pilot to try and see if this was something that worked. What would normally happen in a digital discipleship campaign is you might start with a series of reflections, which we've got in our Lent and Christmas campaigns, and ask people to think about those reflections and think about how that might enable you to live faithfully in the world. We wanted to flip that on its head and basically ask people to think about your experience of life and what God is teaching you through that, to begin to help people think about faith in the everyday. And to help with this, we found three stories which came from friends of ours at LICC, the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, who've been thinking through this for a long time. A story about a young hairdresser apprentice called Victoria, a story about Mike, who's a police officer, and a story of a couple called the Trenemans, who a retired couple. When I told this in South Croydon, I didn't realise that Victoria's dad was in the room, which was rather embarrassing when he said, "That's my daughter you're talking about." I was like, because they're all different names. So Victoria is a hairdresser, And how does Victoria wake up to God in her every day? So Victoria has an important job. As a hairdresser, you'll know that hairdressers are beauticians and therapists, all worked into one. So as well as talking to their patients, her patrons, they're almost patients as well. They can be telling her anything. And what Victoria realised was that as she was massaging their hair, she would pray for those people.